then we saw the curtains move, and then we saw the cardinal come out and announce who the Pope was. She started screaming because it was her uncle, and I was in the moment of disbelief that this cannot be possible, because it just isn't, it's too...
To the world, he's Pope Leo XIV, a living symbol of faith and humility. But behind the holy image is a secret the Vatican never wanted out. Now, his own brother has finally broken decades of silence, and what he's revealed could shake the church to its core. Growing up in a small village outside of Rome, Marco Bianchi, who would one day become Pope Leo XIV, was an unusual child from the start. His brother Antonio remembers how Marco would often wake up before sunrise to pray in their tiny bedroom. Even at 6 years old, Marco had this serious way about him, Antonio recalls. While other kids were playing soccer in the streets, he would sit under the old olive tree reading religious books that most adults found difficult. Their grandmother Maria was the first to predict Marco's future. One summer evening when Marco was just 7, she watched him carefully arrange small stones in the pattern of St. Peter's Square. She placed her weathered hand on his head and announced to the family, "This boy will serve in the Vatican someday." Everyone laughed it off as an old woman's fancy, but Antonio noticed how Marco's eyes lit up at the idea. School was never difficult for Marco. His teachers often told his parents that he had a gift for understanding complex ideas and explaining them simply to his classmates. By age 10, he had memorized more prayers and Bible passages than most adults in their village. What surprised people most was that despite his serious nature, Marco had a playful side too. He loved practical jokes and could do spot-on impressions of the village priest that made even the strictest nuns laugh. Perhaps the most striking prediction came from Father Domenico, who visited their parish when Marco was 12. During Mass, the visiting priest stopped mid-sermon when he noticed Marco helping an elderly woman find her place in the prayer book. After the service, Father Domenico approached the Bianchi family and said something that Antonio never forgot. "Your son has the heart of a shepherd. One day he will wear the fisherman's ring." Their parents were confused, but Antonio knew the priest was talking about the papal ring. Unlike many boys his age, Marco's bedroom walls weren't covered with posters of soccer stars or musicians. Instead, he had maps of missionary journeys and pictures of famous churches. His most prized possession was a small wooden cross given to him by their grandfather, which he carried everywhere. Marco wasn't perfect, Antonio insists. He had a terrible temper when he thought something was unfair. Once, he got into a fist fight with the butcher's son who was bullying a stray dog. Our father was furious, but Marco just said, "Sometimes you have to fight for those who can't fight for themselves." By his teenage years, Marco surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to become a doctor. He spent months volunteering at the local clinic, learning first aid and helping the elderly. Antonio remembers asking his brother why he'd chosen medicine instead of becoming a priest. Marco's answer was simple: Jesus healed the sick before he preached to them. The turning point came during a school trip to Rome when Marco was 15. While their classmates were busy taking photos and buying souvenirs, Marco disappeared for nearly an hour. The teachers were frantic until they found him sitting quietly in a small chapel near the Vatican, deep in conversation with an elderly cardinal. When asked what they discussed, Marco only smiled and said, "My future." 3 months later, he told his family he wanted to enter the seminary. Looking back, Antonio says, "It seems like everyone knew my brother's path before he did. But Marco always said he was just following where his heart led him. Who could have guessed it would lead all the way to the papal throne?" So what changed? How did a boy once torn between medicine and mischief begin climbing the ranks of the most powerful religious institution in the world? Before Marco Bianchi became Pope Leo XIV, he walked a long path through the Catholic Church. His journey began in a small seminary in Milan, Italy, where he studied as a teenager. Marco was known for his sharp mind and kind heart, traits that would help him throughout his career. At age 25, Marco became a priest in a modest parish near Rome. He spent his days helping local families, visiting the sick, and giving sermons that people could easily understand. Unlike some priests who used complicated words, Father Marco explained faith in ways that connected with everyday people. 3 years later, his talents caught the attention of a bishop who invited him to work at the Vatican. There, Marco helped write important letters and documents. His clear writing style made difficult church ideas easier for regular Catholics to understand. By his mid-30s, Marco was named a bishop himself. He chose to serve in a struggling region in southern Italy where many people were poor. Instead of staying in a fancy house, Bishop Marco lived simply and used church money to build schools and soup kitchens. This earned him respect from both his community and church leaders. When Marco turned 45, he faced his biggest challenge yet. A scandal had broken out in the church and many people were angry and losing faith. Pope Benedict asked Marco to help fix the situation. Marco traveled to different countries, listening to people's concerns and working to make things right. He didn't make excuses or hide problems. He faced them honestly, which was unusual for church leaders at that time. His honest approach impressed the Pope, who made Marco a cardinal at age 52, younger than most who received this honor. As Cardinal Bianchi, he continued his pattern of hard work and simple living. While some cardinals enjoyed luxury, Marco was often found talking with regular people or volunteering at homeless shelters. During his time as cardinal, Marco helped modernize some church practices without changing core beliefs. He encouraged priests to use social media to connect with young people and supported programs that protected the environment. God's creation needs our care, he often said. Cardinal Bianchi also stood firm during disagreements within the church. Some leaders wanted to stick strictly to old ways, while others pushed for major changes. Marco found middle ground, respecting tradition while recognizing when updates were needed. His ability to bring people together became especially important when Pope Benedict's health declined. Many cardinals began to look to Marco for guidance during this difficult time. He visited the Pope often, offering comfort and helping manage church affairs as the elderly leader grew weaker. Throughout his rise in the church, Marco never forgot his humble beginnings. He called his mother every Sunday and returned to his childhood neighborhood at least once a year. People who knew him said that despite his important positions, he remained the same thoughtful person who had left Milan decades earlier. By the time the previous pope passed away, Cardinal Bianchi had earned respect across the church world. Though he never sought the position of pope, his journey had prepared him for the possibility in ways no one could have predicted. And yet, none of that could have prepared anyone for what happened next, when the white smoke rose and a school teacher's brother became the leader of over 1 billion people. The day Cardinal Antonio Bianchi entered the Sistine Chapel for the conclave, his brother Marco watched from his small apartment in Rome. Marco had never imagined his older brother might become pope. The brothers had grown up in a humble home in Naples, and while Antonio had chosen the path of priesthood, Marco had become a school teacher. As the cardinals gathered in Vatican City, the world waited. Inside the Sistine Chapel, beneath Michelangelo's famous ceiling, 117 cardinals from around the world prepared to elect a new leader for the Catholic Church. The doors were locked, and the phrase extra omnes, meaning everyone out, was announced, sealing the cardinals inside until they reached a decision. Marco later learned from his brother that the first day of voting produced no clear winner. Black smoke rose from the chapel's chimney, telling the waiting crowds that no pope had been chosen. Antonio had received only a few votes in the first round, not enough to be considered a serious candidate. But things changed quickly on the second day. Several cardinals who supported other candidates began to shift toward Antonio. They admired his work with the poor and his ability to speak clearly about complicated church matters. By the third round of voting, Antonio had gained significant support. Marco was shopping for groceries when his phone buzzed with messages. "Turn on the TV," friends texted. White smoke was rising from the Sistine Chapel. A new pope had been elected. Marco rushed home and turned on his television just in time to hear the announcement from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. "Habemus Papam." "We have a pope," the cardinal announced to the cheering crowd. When the name Antonio Bianchi echoed across St. Peter's Square, Marco dropped to his knees in shock. His brother, who had once shared a bedroom with him in their small childhood home, was now Pope Leo XIV. Later, Antonio revealed to Marco what happened inside the conclave. The final vote had been surprisingly decisive. Over 2/3 of the cardinals had chosen him. When asked if he accepted the position, Antonio had paused for nearly a full minute, praying silently before saying, "I accept." Marco remembered how his brother described that moment. "I felt completely unworthy, but I knew I couldn't refuse what God was asking of me." After accepting, Antonio chose the name Leo after Pope Leo XIII, whose writings on social justice had deeply influenced him during his studies. The cardinals then approached one by one to promise their obedience to the new pope. What few people knew, as Marco later shared, was that Antonio had been battling a minor health issue during the conclave, painful arthritis in his knees that made it difficult to kneel during the long ceremonies. Yet he had hidden his discomfort, not wanting his physical limitations to influence the cardinal's decisions. When Marco finally saw his brother 3 days after the election, Antonio was already transformed by his new role. He wore the white papal cassock and carried the weight of his office in his expression. Yet when the brothers embraced privately, Antonio whispered, "I'm still your annoying big brother, just with a fancier hat." The election had changed everything for both brothers. Marco suddenly found himself the brother of the world's most influential religious leader, while Antonio faced the enormous responsibility of guiding over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. But behind the cheers and ceremonies, something much more intimate was unfolding. Private conversations that would expose the Pope's fears, regrets, and a secret he'd carried for decades. The morning after the election, Marco received a phone call from the Vatican. His brother wanted to see him right away. As Marco walked through the grand hallways, guided by a young priest, he felt out of place in his simple clothes. When the doors to the papal apartment opened, Marco found Antonio sitting alone, still looking stunned by his new position. The brothers embraced, and for a moment, it was just like when they were boys in Naples. "I never thought it would be me," Antonio confessed, gesturing to the papal ring on his finger. "Last night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dad and how he always said I talked too much during dinner." Marco laughed. He'd be proud, though probably worried you'd talk the ears off every cardinal. Their conversation shifted to more serious matters. Antonio revealed that during the conclave, he had been thinking about their childhood secret, how they had once accidentally started a fire in their neighbor's shed while playing with matches. They had never told anyone, letting another boy take the blame. "I've carried that guilt for 40 years, Antonio said. "Now I'm supposed to be the moral leader for millions. How can I guide others when I've never made that right?" Marco was surprised. "You still think about that?" "We were just kids." "That's not all," Antonio continued, his voice dropping. "Remember when I left teaching to join the seminary? I never told you the real reason." Over the next hour, Antonio shared things he'd never told his brother, about his doubts during his early priesthood, about a period of depression he'd hidden from everyone, and about his fears that he wasn't worthy of his new role. "The cardinals see me as this perfect example," Antonio said, "if they knew everything." Marco listened, then offered the straightforward advice he was known for. "You're human. That's why they chose you, not because you're perfect, but because you understand struggle." In the weeks that followed, the brothers met regularly. Marco became Antonio's connection to the outside world, telling him honest truths that others were afraid to share. When Pope Leo XIV gave his first major address, Marco noticed his brother had incorporated their conversations about their humble beginnings. "You mentioned Naples and Dad's fishing boat," Marco said afterward. "People need to know I haven't forgotten where I came from," Antonio replied. "The church needs to remember the ordinary people it serves." 6 months into his papacy, Antonio faced his first major crisis, a scandal involving church finances. Late one night, he called Marco in distress. "The same people who voted for me are now questioning every decision," he said. "I don't know who to trust." Marco reminded him of their mother's advice. "Remember what Mom always said? Truth doesn't need fancy clothes. Just be honest, even when it's hard." Taking his brother's advice, Pope Leo XIV did something unprecedented. He publicly acknowledged the church's mistakes and outlined a clear plan for reform. The transparency shocked many in the Vatican but earned him respect worldwide. What no one knew was that before his public statement, Antonio had made a private journey with Marco back to Naples, where they found the man they had wrongly allowed to be blamed for the shed fire. Now in his 70s, the man was stunned when the Pope himself asked for forgiveness. That day changed something in him, Marco later explained. "My brother understood that healing begins with facing the past, not hiding it." Their childhood bond had become something unexpected, a source of strength and wisdom for a pope facing the modern world's challenges. Behind the grand ceremonies and official statements, two brothers from Naples continued their lifelong conversation, one that now helped guide a church of over 1 billion people. And just when you think you understand the man behind the mitre, his brother comes forward with revelations that challenge the entire public image of Pope Leo XIV. The story of Pope Leo XIV has always been presented to the public as one of faith and dedication. For years, the world knew him as a humble servant of the church who rose through the ranks because of his wisdom and kindness. But today, we're learning there might be more to the story. Marco Bianchi, the Pope's younger brother, has come forward with information that paints a different picture of the man known to the world as Pope Leo XIV. Born Antonio Bianchi in a small village outside of Naples, Italy, the future pope apparently had a past that the Vatican has kept hidden. According to Marco, Antonio wasn't always planning to join the church. As a teenager, he was actually part of a local gang that stole from tourists and shops in their coastal town. My brother was clever. Marco revealed he could talk his way out of any situation, which made him valuable to the group. The turning point came when Antonio was 19. During what was supposed to be a simple theft from a church donation box, something unexpected happened. Marco explains that his brother found himself alone in the church after his friends ran off, face to face with an elderly priest who didn't call the police, but instead talked with Antonio for hours. That night changed everything for him, Marco said. He came home different. He told me the priest showed him a better path. What's most surprising is that Antonio never fully shared this story with the Vatican. His official history states he felt called to the church from childhood. Marco claims this isn't true, and that his brother's past was carefully hidden as he moved up in the church ranks. Even more shocking are Marco's claims about certain church funds. He alleges that early in his career, Antonio redirected money meant for church repairs to help poor families in their hometown. While the intention was good, this unauthorized use of funds would have been against church rules. My brother always believed helping people was more important than following every rule, Marco explained. He thought the church sometimes got too caught up in traditions instead of doing what Jesus would actually do. But Marco also revealed that Pope Leo XIV has maintained secret communication with leaders of other religions for years, even before becoming pope. These private conversations focused on finding common ground between different faiths, something that might upset more traditional members of the church. Perhaps most controversial is Marco's claim that his brother has privately expressed support for allowing priests to marry and for women to have more leadership roles in the church. These positions go against centuries of Catholic tradition. The Vatican has responded by calling Marco's claims misunderstandings of private family conversations and maintains that Pope Leo XIV has always been faithful to church teachings and traditions. When asked why he's coming forward now, Marco simply said, "My brother always taught me that truth matters. I think people should know the real man behind the robes, someone who made mistakes, learned from them, and whose complicated past actually makes him more understanding of human struggles, not less worthy of his position."